The small town of Willow Creek was quiet most of the year, surrounded by rolling hills, fields of golden wheat, and dusty roads that seemed to stretch endlessly. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. Life moved slowly, and the rhythm of the town depended on seasons, hard work, and unspoken rules that had been followed for generations. At the center of this rural landscape was the Thompson Ranch, a large property that had belonged to the Thompson family for decades. The ranch was famous in the area for its size, its hard-working animals, and, most importantly, for its owner, Jack Thompson. Jack was a man in his late 40s, tall, strong, and weathered by years of sun and wind. His face was rough, lined with experience, and his hands were calloused from years of manual labor. People in town respected him, but they also feared him a little. Jack had a reputation for being stubborn and independent, a man who followed his own rules rather than the town's expectations. He rarely mingled with others unless necessary, preferring the solitude of his land and the company of his animals. His neighbors often whispered that he had been hurt by life before, though no one really knew the details. Life on the ranch followed a strict routine. Every morning, Jack woke before dawn, feeding the horses and cattle, checking fences, and preparing for the day. He worked hard, often from sunrise to sunset, with only a short break for meals. Despite his gruff exterior, he cared deeply for the ranch and took pride in his work. This dedication made him a figure of admiration, though one that remained distant from the townspeople. One late spring morning, as Jack was repairing a fence near the eastern pasture, he noticed a young woman standing at the edge of the road. She seemed out of place among the fields and dust, carrying a small bundle in her hands. Her clothes were simple and worn, and her face showed the kind of nervousness that came from being far from home. She looked around cautiously, as if unsure whether to approach or retreat. Her name was Emily Carson, and she had recently arrived in Willow Creek. Life in her previous town had been difficult. She had lost her parents at a young age and had been forced to move from one place to another, taking odd jobs wherever she could. Emily was strong and resourceful, but she was also aware of her vulnerability. She had heard about the Thompson Ranch and hoped that perhaps Jack might offer her work or shelter. Though she had never met him before, she knew the stories Jack was fair to those who worked hard and earned his trust, though he was not a man to be taken lightly. Emily took a deep breath and walked toward the ranch. Jack noticed her approach and straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't speak immediately, simply observing her with a measured gaze. Emily's heart pounded as she drew closer. She tried to appear confident, though inside, she was nervous. Finally, she spoke. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. I was hoping you might have work. I can do anything. Feeding animals, cleaning stables, whatever is needed." Jack studied her for a long moment. He was not quick to trust strangers, but he could sense her sincerity. He nodded slowly and said, "You can start by helping me in the stables. We'll see if you're capable." There was no warmth in his voice, but there was also no cruelty. Emily felt a small flicker of relief. She had taken a chance, and for now, it seemed to have worked. Over the next few weeks, Emily settled into the rhythm of ranch life. She learned quickly, gaining experience in tasks she had never done before. Feeding the horses, mending fences, and cleaning the barns became part of her daily routine. Jack watched her closely, sometimes offering guidance, sometimes leaving her to figure things out on her own. Though he rarely spoke more than necessary, his approval mattered to Emily. She found herself working harder than ever, determined to prove that she belonged on the ranch. Despite the demanding work, Emily began to appreciate the solitude of the land. There was a certain beauty in the quiet mornings, when the sun rose over the hills and the world seemed still. She found comfort in the predictability of chores and the honesty of the animals. Slowly, she began to feel a sense of belonging, even in the presence of the reserved and sometimes intimidating Jack. However, not everything on the ranch was simple. Jack was a man of strong opinions, and he often made decisions that seemed strange or even reckless to outsiders. He had his own way of doing things, and he was unwilling to compromise. even when the townspeople disagreed with him. Emily, though still new, noticed the tension that sometimes existed between him and the rest of Willow Creek. People would whisper when he walked through town, questioning his choices or warning others to stay away. Emily did not fully understand the reasons, but she felt the weight of expectation, both from the ranch and from the town. One evening, after a long day of work, Emily sat near the barn, watching the sun sink behind the hills. Jack approached, carrying a bucket of water. He handed it to her without a word, and she nodded in thanks. There was a quiet understanding between them, a mutual respect born from hard work and perseverance. Yet beneath the surface, there was also an unspoken tension. Emily had begun to notice that some of Jack's habits, while practical on the ranch, sometimes skirted the rules that others in town held sacred. She did not yet know how far she would be willing to go in following him, and she sensed that a moment might come when she would have to speak up. As the days turned into weeks, Emily became more comfortable with her life on the ranch. She enjoyed the work and the simplicity of the land, but she also realized that Jack's world was not like hers. It was a world of boundaries and expectations, both spoken and unspoken. Emily knew she had to be careful, balancing her own values with the reality of life on the ranch. She could see that Jack was a man who respected strength and determination, but she also knew that his stubbornness could lead to trouble not just for him, but for anyone associated with him. The town of Willow Creek continued its quiet observation from afar. People noticed the young woman at the ranch, her presence stirring curiosity and speculation. While some admired her courage and willingness to work, others whispered warnings. They spoke of the forbidden lines in the town rules and customs that were deeply ingrained and not to be broken. Emily, sensing the unspoken tension, began to understand that life on the ranch was not just about hard work, it was also about navigating the delicate balance between individual freedom and community expectation. As spring gave way to early summer, Emily realized that her time on the ranch was teaching her more than just skills. It was teaching her about people, judgment, and courage. She saw Jack as more than a gruff rancher. She saw a man shaped by life's hardships, driven by a desire to live on his own terms. She also saw herself growing stronger, more capable, and more aware of the world around her. Yet, Emily could not shake a growing sense of unease. There were moments when Jack's actions puzzled her. Choices he made that seemed harmless to him but could anger the townspeople if they learned. She did not yet know where she drew the line, but she sensed that a day would come when she would have to decide whether to speak up and whether Jack would listen. That thought lingered in her mind like a shadow, growing with each passing day, quietly warning her that life on the ranch was about to become more complicated than she had ever imagined. The quiet of Willow Creek, the steady rhythm of the ranch, and the unspoken tension between tradition and independence, all of these forces set the stage for the challenges to come. Emily's journey had only just begun, and the choices she would face were not simply about work or survival. They were about courage, honesty, and the difficult path of standing up for what she believed in, even when it meant confronting someone she had come to respect and even depend upon. And so, the first chapter of their story closed on a calm evening, with the sun dipping behind the hills, the animals settling for the night, and Emily wondering what the next day would bring. She did not know it yet, but life on the Thompson Ranch would soon test her in ways she had never expected, and the quiet town of Willow Creek was about to become anything but peaceful. As the weeks passed on the Thompson Ranch, life settled into a predictable rhythm, at least on the surface. Emily had grown stronger, both physically and mentally, adjusting to the hard work and long days. She was no longer the timid newcomer who had first arrived with uncertainty in her eyes. Instead, she had become a part of the daily life on the ranch, learning not only how to care for the animals and maintain the land, but also how to read the moods and habits of Jack Thompson. Jack remained a man of few words, and though he did not openly show warmth, Emily could sense his respect. He noticed her dedication, her careful attention to detail, and her willingness to endure the hardships of ranch life without complaint. He had never been one to openly praise anyone, but Emily felt his approval in quiet ways. A nod of acknowledgement when she completed a task correctly, or a glance of satisfaction when he saw the fields tended carefully and the animals well cared for. Yet, Even as she grew comfortable, Emily began to notice a side of Jack that unsettled her. There were times when he would take actions that seemed harmless to him, but could easily anger or confuse the townspeople. He had little patience for gossip, town rules, or traditions that he considered outdated. He would sometimes work late into the night, repairing fences or moving cattle in ways that others in Willow Creek would consider reckless or even inappropriate. Emily did not fully understand his reasoning, but she felt a growing unease. One afternoon, as Emily was leading a young colt back to the stable, she noticed Jack moving some supplies in a way that seemed unusual. He had placed a pile of wood near the edge of the pasture, close to the town road, something the neighbors had always avoided doing. She paused, unsure if she should speak up. "Mr. Thompson," she called softly, "is it safe to leave the wood here? People might notice, and it could cause trouble." Jack looked at her, his face calm but firm. "It won't cause trouble if it's done right," he said. "I know what I'm doing. Don't worry about what others think." "Armand." Jack looked at her. "Armand is now." "Armand is now." Emily hesitated. She wanted to trust him, but a small voice in her mind reminded her that some of his actions skirted the lines of what was considered proper in Willow Creek. She nodded, but inside, a seed of concern was planted. If Jack continued to disregard the town's expectations, she feared that the consequences could be serious, both for him and for anyone associated with him, including herself. That evening, after finishing the chores and preparing the animals for the night, Emily sat near the barn, reflecting on the day. She had begun to understand the complexity of living and working on the ranch. It was not just about performing tasks or caring for animals. It was about understanding the delicate balance between independence and responsibility, between personal choices and the expectations of the larger community. As she watched the sunset, Emily realized that her unease was growing. She had seen glimpses of Jack's stubbornness, and while she admired his determination, she also recognized the danger in ignoring boundaries that the town held sacred. She wondered how far she should speak up if she disagreed with his decisions. Her heart told her to be cautious, but her mind knew that at some point, she might have to confront him. The moment came sooner than she expected. One morning, as Emily was feeding the horses, she noticed Jack preparing to move a herd of cattle through a narrow trail near the edge of the property that bordered the town's road. The path was risky, with uneven ground and hidden holes that could easily injure the animals or even the ranch workers. Emily felt her stomach tighten with worry. "Mr. Thompson," she said, stepping forward, "please, I don't think we should take the cattle this way. It's dangerous. Someone could get hurt, and people in town will be angry." Jack paused, looking at her. His eyes were steady, calm, but there was a hint of frustration. "Emily, I've done this before. The path is fine if we're careful. Trust me." Emily shook her head, her voice trembling slightly but filled with conviction. "I understand you've done it before, but things have changed. There are new families in town, new rules, and people are watching. Please, I'm asking you not as a worker, but as someone who cares about the ranch and the animals, please don't do this." Jack sighed deeply, the lines on his face deepening. He had faced opposition before, from neighbors, from employees, even from family members who didn't understand his methods. But Emily's words struck a different chord. She was new, inexperienced in some ways, and yet she spoke with a courage that surprised him. For a moment, he considered her plea, but his pride and stubbornness would not allow him to back down. "No," he said finally. "I will do this my way. I know the risks, and I will take responsibility. The herd needs to move, and I won't let fear control my actions." Emily's heart sank. She had hoped that he would listen, that he would consider the safety of the animals and the potential consequences, but she also understood something important. Jack Thompson was a man who believed in doing what he thought was right, even if others disagreed. Over the next few days, Emily noticed tension building not just between her and Jack, but in the town itself. Word of his plans and actions began to spread. Some neighbors disapproved, while others were curious. The town's social network, small as it was, worked quickly to form opinions and judgments. Whispers and gossip filled the air, and Emily felt the weight of being caught between loyalty to Jack and concern for the community. One afternoon, she confronted him again, her voice firmer this time. "Jack, please, think about what the town will say. People will not understand your choices, and it could cause real problems for all of us. I don't want to see anyone hurt, and I don't want to see the ranch in trouble." Jack looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he shook his head slowly. "Emily, I appreciate your concern, but I make my own decisions. I can't live my life based on what other people think. If we do things my way, we do them safely. And that's all that matters." Emily felt a mix of frustration and admiration. She knew he was stubborn, but she also knew he was deeply committed to his land and his animals. Still, the unease lingered. She realized that living on the ranch meant accepting that some battles could not be avoided, and some risks were unavoidable when dealing with someone like Jack. As the tension grew, Emily found herself navigating a complex web of emotions. She respected Jack's independence and experience, but she also recognized her own responsibility to speak up when she saw danger. It was a delicate balance, one that required courage, tact, and an understanding of human nature. She began to learn that life on the ranch was not just about labor and survival, but also about judgment, ethics, and the difficult choices that come with loyalty and honesty. One evening, as Emily worked alone in the barn, she overheard a conversation between two townspeople who had come to the ranch with supplies. Their words were filled with concern and curiosity. "Have you seen what Jack's planning?" one whispered. "It's reckless. Someone could get hurt, and the town will hold him responsible." Emily realized that the consequences of Jack's actions were not confined to the ranch. The town was already reacting, and her own role in the situation was becoming more complicated. She could not ignore the warning signs. Speaking up was no longer just a personal choice. It was a necessity if she wanted to prevent harm and protect the animals, herself, and the ranch. That night, as she lay in the small room she had been given in the barn, Emily thought about what she would do next. She knew she would have to confront Jack more directly, expressing her concerns in a way that he could understand and perhaps respect. She also knew that the coming days would test her courage, patience, and ability to stand firm in the face of stubbornness and tradition. The following morning, Emily approached Jack once more. Her voice was steady, though her heart raced. "Jack, I'm asking you again, please reconsider. The path is dangerous, and the town will react. I don't want to see anyone hurt. I don't want to see the ranch in trouble. Please, listen to me this time." Jack paused, the weight of her words settling over him. For the first time, he seemed to consider not just the practical risks, but the emotional and social consequences. Yet after a long silence, he shook his head and said, "Emily, I've made my decision. We move the herd my way. You can help, or you can stay out of the way." Emily's stomach tightened, but she did not back down. She realized that life on the Thompson Ranch was about to become more complicated than she had ever imagined. Her courage, determination, and sense of responsibility would soon be tested. And the choices she made could shape not only her future but the future of the ranch and her relationship with Jack. The days that followed were tense. Emily worked carefully, watching every step as the herd moved through the narrow path. Jack's skill and experience were undeniable, but Emily could not ignore the anxiety that gnawed at her. She began to see that courage was not just about standing up to others, it was also about facing fear, making difficult decisions, and accepting the consequences of those decisions, no matter the outcome. And so, life on the ranch continued, a mixture of hard work, quiet reflection, and growing tension. Emily had learned that speaking up was not easy, especially when confronting someone as determined and independent as Jack. She had also learned that true courage often comes from doing what is right, even when it is difficult, and even when others may not agree. The stage was set for challenges yet to come, as the delicate balance between loyalty, responsibility, and courage began to shift. Emily understood that her journey on the Thompson Ranch was far from over, and that the choices she made in the coming days would define not just her future, but the future of everyone involved. The tension on the Thompson Ranch was no longer contained within the boundaries of the property. Word of Jack's decisions and his refusal to follow the town's expectations had begun to spread through Willow Creek. What had started as a quiet, personal matter between Jack and Emily was now drawing attention from every corner of the small community. The whispers, which had begun as cautious murmurs, grew louder each day, fueled by curiosity, fear, and the need to take sides. It started slowly. Neighbors passing the ranch on the dusty road would pause, exchanging quick glances and quiet words. "Did you hear what Jack's doing?" Someone would ask, their voice low, as if afraid of being overheard. "I wouldn't want to be near him right now." Others would nod, murmuring their agreement, adding their own speculation. Soon, everyone in Willow Creek knew that the rancher had taken a course of action that many considered reckless, even defiant. Emily noticed the change immediately. The next time she went to town to purchase supplies, she felt the weight of every stare and the tension in the conversations around her. People who had once smiled politely now regarded her with suspicion or barely concealed disapproval. It was as though by simply being at the ranch, she had become a part of the controversy, and the townspeople were judging her as much as they were judging Jack. She returned to the ranch feeling unsettled. The animals, usually a source of comfort, seemed almost oblivious to the growing tension outside. But Emily could not ignore the sense of unease. Jack noticed her distraction but said nothing, simply nodding as she finished her chores. There was an unspoken understanding between them. The ranch was their shared responsibility, but the consequences of the outside world were encroaching. As the days went on, the town's reactions became more direct. Neighbors who once offered friendly greetings now avoided the ranch entirely. Supplies and deliveries that had always arrived without question began to be delayed or canceled. Emily overheard people talking about taking measures to prevent Jack from carrying out his plans. There were debates about calling meetings, discussing bylaws, or appealing to local authorities. The once quiet town was now divided, and everyone seemed to have an opinion on what should be done. Emily grew increasingly concerned. She had hoped that Jack's experience and skill would be enough to keep things under control. But she realized that the social consequences were just as important as the physical ones. "Jack," she said one evening as they sat near the barn after a long day, "people are watching. They're talking about what you're doing, and it's not going away. You need to think about how this will affect the ranch and all of us." Jack remained calm, but there was a tension in his jaw, a sign that even he was beginning to feel the pressure. "Emily," he said slowly, "I understand what you're saying. I know people are talking, but the work needs to be done, and I can't let their fear control me. I make decisions based on what's right for the ranch, not what the town thinks is proper." Emily nodded, understanding his perspective, yet still uneasy. She respected Jack's determination, but she also knew that no matter how skilled or careful he was, the judgment of the town could not be ignored. She realized that standing by silently was no longer an option. She had to speak up, to assert her concerns clearly and firmly, even if it risked angering Jack. The following morning, Emily decided to approach the situation directly. She had spent the night considering her words carefully, knowing that the wrong phrasing could escalate the tension even further. "Jack," she began, as he prepared the horses for the day, "I need to tell you something. I understand your point of view, and I respect it. But the town's reaction is growing. People are angry, and some of them may try to interfere. We have to consider that, or this could get much worse than either of us expects." Jack paused, holding the reins in his hands. His eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. "Emily, I know what you're worried about. I've thought about it. But I can't let fear of gossip or anger stop me from doing what's right. I can't live my life trying to please everyone else." Emily felt a mix of frustration and admiration. She knew Jack was right about one thing. He could not be controlled by the town's opinion, but she also understood that ignoring the people around them could have consequences far beyond their immediate control. The ranch, the animals, and even their own safety were all at stake. She realized that she had to find a way to protect everyone involved without directly opposing Jack or risk making the situation worse. Meanwhile, the townspeople were organizing in subtle ways. Small groups would gather near the edges of the town, discussing plans and expressing concerns. Some wanted to approach Jack directly, hoping to reason with him. Others were ready to take stronger measures, aiming to prevent any potential disaster. The town's social network, usually calm and predictable, had become charged with tension. Everyone had an opinion, and everyone wanted to ensure that the rules of Willow Creek were upheld. Emily felt the pressure mounting. She could see the fear in the faces of neighbors who had once been friendly. She could hear the whispers that followed her through the streets, the cautious glances of strangers in the market, and the quiet disapproval in every conversation she overheard. It was clear that Jack's actions were no longer private matters. They had become a symbol of defiance and change, something that challenged the traditional balance of the town. One afternoon, a group of neighbors approached the ranch. They stood near the fence, watching silently at first. Emily could see the tension in their posture, the concern in their eyes. Finally, one of them spoke. "Jack, we're worried about what you're doing. This path, the way you're moving the herd, it's dangerous. And people are talking. We don't want anyone to get hurt, and we don't want the town to suffer because of it." Jack listened, his expression unreadable. He did not respond immediately. Emily felt a knot tighten in her stomach, unsure of how he would react. After a long pause, he spoke firmly. "I appreciate your concern, but I make my own decisions. I know the risks, and I will take responsibility for them. The ranch must be cared for properly, and I will not be stopped by fear or judgment." The neighbors exchanged worried glances and left quietly, whispering among themselves as they went. Emily knew that their visit would not be the last. The town was becoming more involved, more invested in Jack's choices, and the quiet tension was turning into open scrutiny. She realized that her role was more important than ever. She had to balance loyalty to Jack with her awareness of the growing unrest, and she had to do so carefully, without making the situation worse. Over the next several days, the tension reached a peak. Rumors spread rapidly, fueled by fear and speculation. Some townspeople began to openly criticize Jack, calling him reckless and stubborn. Others supported him quietly, admiring his independence and courage. Emily found herself in the middle, witnessing the divisions forming in the town. She realized that life on the ranch was no longer just about labor and survival. It was about navigating complex social dynamics, understanding human nature, and making difficult choices under pressure. Emily also noticed changes in Jack. Though he remained outwardly calm and steadfast, she could see the strain in his face, the slight tension in his movements. Even a man as strong and independent as he was not immune to the weight of social pressure. Emily understood that this was a pivotal moment for both of them. How they handled the growing tension would determine not only their own futures but also the future of the ranch and the community around them. One evening, as the sun set over the hills, Emily approached Jack once more. Her voice was calm but firm, carrying the weight of her concern. "Jack, I know you want to do things your way, and I respect that. But the town is reacting strongly. People are angry, and some may try to interfere. We have to think about what happens next. We can't ignore the consequences." Jack looked at her, meeting her gaze with steady eyes. After a long silence, he nodded slightly. "Emily, I hear you. I know you're worried, but I've made my decision. We will continue, and I will take responsibility for what comes. You are right, there are consequences, but we cannot let fear control our actions." Emily understood. There was no changing his mind, not entirely. But she also recognized that her voice mattered, that speaking up had an effect. Even if it did not alter his ultimate decision, she felt a mixture of pride and apprehension, knowing that she was learning important lessons about courage, responsibility, and the delicate balance between personal conviction and social pressure. The town of Willow Creek continued to watch and wait. Every action, every decision by Jack and Emily was noted, analyzed, and discussed. The once quiet, predictable life of the town had been disrupted, and people were divided in their opinions. Some admired Jack's independence, while others feared the consequences of his defiance. Emily realized that the outcome of this conflict would shape not only their lives but also the town's understanding of loyalty, courage, and responsibility. And so, the stage was set for what was to come. The tension between the ranch, the townspeople, and the individuals involved had reached a critical point. Emily understood that the days ahead would require strength, careful judgment, and unwavering courage. She knew that mistakes could have serious consequences, and that every choice mattered. Life on the Thompson Ranch had grown complicated in ways Emily had never imagined. The quiet, simple routine she had first known was gone, replaced by a delicate struggle between personal conviction and communal expectation. The story of the ranch, of Jack and Emily, and of the town of Willow Creek was unfolding in real time, with each decision building toward a dramatic and uncertain future. The days on the Thompson Ranch grew tense, heavier with each passing hour. The quiet that had once surrounded the property was gone, replaced by an invisible pressure that seemed to press down from all sides. Willow Creek was no longer merely a backdrop for Jack and Emily's daily work. It had become an active, restless presence, watching, judging, and waiting for the next move. Every step they took, every decision they made, seemed amplified in the eyes of the townspeople. Emily had never felt such a mix of fear and determination in her life. She had learned quickly that courage was not simply about standing up to danger or facing physical challenges. It was about navigating complex social landscapes, understanding human nature, and making difficult choices with wisdom and integrity. She knew that the rancher's stubbornness, combined with the town's mounting frustration, had created a situation that could explode if mishandled. One morning, as Emily tended the stables, she noticed movement near the edge of the property. A small group of townspeople had gathered, observing from a distance. Some were standing quietly, while others whispered among themselves, their eyes fixed on the ranch. Emily's heart sank as she realized that Jack's decisions had now drawn direct attention from the community, and that the tension they had been feeling for weeks was about to come to a head. Jack appeared behind her, his tall figure cutting a calm and confident silhouette against the morning sun. "Emily," he said, his voice steady, "I see them. Let them watch. I'm not afraid of their judgment." Emily nodded, though inside she was filled with apprehension. She admired his courage and independence, but she also recognized the risk. "I understand," she said softly, "but we have to be careful. Their anger could turn into action, and I don't want anyone to get hurt, including us." Jack gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He trusted Emily's judgment, even if he did not agree completely. The balance between them had shifted subtly over the past weeks. Though he was still independent and strong-willed, he had begun to see her as more than just a helper. She was someone who could think, reason, and act under pressure, a partner of sorts in managing not just the ranch, but the consequences of his own stubborn choices. The tension in town was growing. Neighbors who had once maintained a polite distance were now openly discussing how to intervene. Some advocated for diplomacy, hoping to reason with Jack and explain the risks and the potential fallout of his actions. Others were angrier, believing that Jack's refusal to follow tradition threatened the very stability of Willow Creek. They wanted to assert control, to ensure that their rules were upheld, and they were not shy about discussing drastic measures if persuasion failed. Emily understood the delicate nature of the situation. She knew that the ranch's safety and the well-being of the animals depended not only on Jack's skill and experience, but also on their ability to navigate the town's expectations. She decided to approach Jack again, this time with a strategy rather than a plea. "Jack," she said, her tone calm and measured, "we need to consider both the herd and the town. If we act carefully, we can move the animals safely and show the town that we are responsible. It's not about giving in, it's about managing the situation wisely." Jack looked at her, his eyes steady but thoughtful. For the first time, he seemed to consider the idea of compromise without surrender. "Emily," he said slowly, "I don't want to be controlled, but I see your point. We can take precautions. We can be smart about this. But the decision about how we move the herd remains mine. Do you understand? I do, Emily replied. And I'll follow your lead, but I'll also help manage the risks. Together, we can make this work. Over the next several days, Emily and Jack worked meticulously to ensure the herd's movement would be as safe as possible. They inspected the paths, repaired weak fences, and positioned themselves strategically to guide the cattle. Emily's careful planning and attention to detail complemented Jack's experience and decisiveness. It was a delicate dance, requiring constant vigilance, patience, and teamwork. As the day of the herd's movement arrived, tension hung heavy in the air. Townspeople had gathered at a distance, curious and anxious to see what would happen. Emily felt her heart pound as the first animals began to move. Jack remained calm, his presence steady and commanding, while Emily worked alongside him, guiding the cattle and watching for any signs of trouble. The townspeople watched in silence at first, then whispered among themselves, some with admiration, others with continued concern. Every step of the herd was observed, every action measured and judged. Emily felt the weight of their scrutiny, but she also felt a quiet pride. She had learned to act under pressure, to think clearly even when emotions ran high, and to balance loyalty with responsibility. The movement of the herd was not without challenges. Some of the cattle became nervous and restless, requiring careful guidance to prevent injury. A few animals veered off the path, forcing Jack and Emily to act quickly. Emily's heart raced, but she focused on her training and instincts. She calmly directed the animals, reassured them with her presence, and coordinated with Jack to keep the herd moving steadily. By late afternoon, the herd had reached its destination safely. The tension that had gripped the ranch and the town began to ease, replaced by a mixture of relief, admiration, and continued curiosity. The townspeople, who had expected chaos or disaster, were surprised by the efficiency and care with which the task had been completed. Some whispered words of praise, while others remained skeptical. But one thing was clear. The actions of Jack and Emily had made an impact. Emily felt a sense of accomplishment, but she also knew the work was not over. The town would take time to adjust, to understand that Jack's decisions, while unconventional, were guided by skill, experience, and responsibility. She had learned that courage and wisdom were not opposites. They could coexist when guided by careful thought and ethical action. Over the following weeks, the town began to respond differently. While there were still whispers and cautious glances, many people began to recognize the results of Jack and Emily's efforts. The herd was healthy, the ranch remained intact, and no harm had come to anyone. Slowly, the community started to see that independence did not necessarily mean recklessness, and that judgment should be tempered with understanding. Emily noticed changes in Jack as well. He remained strong and independent, but she could see a subtle shift in his demeanor. He began to consider her opinions more carefully, acknowledging the value of her perspective and the importance of teamwork. Their relationship, once defined by authority and obedience, had evolved into one of mutual respect, cooperation, and trust. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the ranch house watching the sun set over the hills, Emily reflected on all that had happened. The tension, fear, and uncertainty had been intense, but the experience had taught her invaluable lessons about courage, responsibility, and human nature. She had learned that standing up for what is right sometimes means facing opposition, navigating complex social pressures, and acting with integrity even when the outcome is uncertain. Jack, sensing her thoughts, spoke softly. "Emily, you've done well. I could not have managed all this without you. You've shown courage, wisdom, and dedication. I respect that more than you know." Emily smiled, feeling a sense of warmth and satisfaction. "Thank you, Jack. I've learned so much working here. Not just about the ranch or the animals, but about people, choices, and responsibility. It hasn't been easy, but I'm glad I stayed." The town of Willow Creek slowly returned to its normal rhythm, though the events at the ranch remained a topic of conversation for some time. The experience had shifted perspectives, teaching the community that sometimes rules and expectations must be balanced with understanding, skill, and careful judgment. Jack's independence and Emily's courage had not only ensured the safety of the ranch and the herd, but had also sparked a quiet reflection in the town about fear, judgment, and respect. For Emily and Jack, life on the ranch continued, but it was different now. There was a new sense of balance, a deeper understanding of each other, and a stronger connection forged through shared experience and challenges overcome. They knew that life would continue to present difficulties, but they had proven that careful planning, courage, and cooperation could overcome even the most difficult obstacles. And so, the story of the Thompson Ranch came to a quiet, satisfying resolution. The tension, fear, and uncertainty had passed, replaced by a sense of accomplishment, mutual respect, and a deeper understanding of courage and responsibility. Emily had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident. Jack had shown that independence, when guided by skill and care, could coexist with responsibility, and the town of Willow Creek had learned an important lesson: that courage, integrity, and careful action can change even the most rigid expectations, leaving a lasting impact on everyone involved. The sun set over the hills once more, casting long shadows across the fields and bathing the ranch in a warm, golden light. The animals rested peacefully in their pastures, the work of the day complete. Emily stood beside Jack, looking out over the land that had challenged and taught them both. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that they had faced the storms together and come through stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever the future might bring.